So good to see you today. We appreciate that you were able to make the time today to join us for this webinar. I am Angie Pitha. I'm the project lead of the Election Official Legal Defense Network, and we are very excited to kick off our third webinar in a communications training series for election officials. So this is the third webinar of 3, and it's been presented all along by EOLDN, but also our partners at the communications firm CGCN. Today's topic is this: it's communicating in a crisis. Let me tell you a little bit about CGCN. They are a professional communications firm that has partnered with EOLDN since 2022 to provide general communications guidance to our EOLDN audience of election officials across the country. EOLDN has also been delighted to partner with CGCN to provide communications assistance to eligible elections offices at no cost. I have a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers today. We will take questions at the end of this presentation. Walker, who you can see has a screen devoted to our team today. She's one of our presenters and one of our hosts, and she will help take those questions and then queue them up for us at the end of the presentation. You can place those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Also, we will be sharing the recording, slides, and additional links that have helpful information that illuminate some of the things we'll be talking about today to all webinar registrants in an email in the coming days. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce, and for some of you webinar participants, reintroduce our partners from CGCN, who are our presenters today. We have Senior Partner Tracy Schmidt and Senior Advisor Matt Hartwig. We're also so thrilled on this webinar to welcome the Deputy Clerk-Recorder of Contra, Costa County, California, Tommy Gong. Some of you are probably familiar with Tommy Gong because he is all over the place with his wonderful guidance and his fantastic attitude in the election space. So good to have you as well, Tommy. Tommy will tell us about his experience working with CGCN to meet and overcome a potential public relations crisis. Tracy and Matt, let's get started.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Angie. And thank you to all of you for joining. I know it's a perhaps the most busy time of the year. We're around 6 weeks for an election, but having the skill set to effectively address and mitigate communications in the time of a crisis is probably one of the most important skill sets you can have in your role. While a crisis is unpredictable, it certainly isn't unexpected. So unfortunately, it's really a matter of when rather than if you will face a crisis throughout your professional career, and one that permeates into the media. You know, it takes years and years to kind of build an organization or a professional brand and reputation. And that is something that can be eroded in less than a news cycle if the crisis is not handled swiftly and with authenticity and accuracy. So this is why this is really important. Unfortunately, the best training for a crisis is experiencing one, living through one, working through one. I was a spokesperson on several presidential campaigns and worked at the Republican National Committee, as well as a lot of experience with publicly traded companies. So I have no kind of secret to crisis, but I do know that even if you haven't been in the spotlight, you can certainly train your brain and really train your team to have those kind of skills you need to help navigate the crisis and the situation. And with that, we're going to kick it off. First slide. How we're going to frame this conversation is first talking about kind of before the storm, by what you do, by what you do today, even 6 weeks out from the election day, is really kind of going to make or break how well prepared you are to be effective should the potentially inevitable, but hopefully not, occur. And while like the best time was yesterday, the next best time is after this call in terms of preparation. We're also going to talk about going back and looking at that toolbook and that toolkit that you would have ideally prepared in this prep time, and how you can utilize that to respond and navigate the crisis in real time, and understanding how you can have not only like the tools, but the team you need to be effective. And lastly, unfortunately, a crisis usually outlasts 1 or 2 or 3 news cycles. So how you can, once you've kind of gotten your legs under you, use your intuition and your eagle eye and your monitoring to make sure that you're really refining your message and ensuring that your response and your interactions are only strengthened so you can be best positioned for success. And then we've got some time from Q&A. And as Angie mentioned, we're going to be hearing from Tommy as well. So I'll go ahead and kick it off and talk about before the storm. As I mentioned, we're 6 weeks out. The best time to plan was yesterday, but today is certainly not too late. I can't stress enough the significance of really sitting down with your team and carving out a half day, even like several couple-hour sessions to kind of map out a playbook, which we'll talk about a little later, but really thinking through your relationships with the media, what reporters might be the ones that are contacting you, and engaging those reporters early and often. Some of you may already have those relationships, and if you don't, that's okay, but it's important that the first time you have a conversation with the reporter isn't when you're taking a call in the thick of a recount or allegations of election fraud. We're going to talk a little bit about preparing your playbook and making sure you've got those tools and you've thought some of this through in terms of messaging, but also the mechanics and your team. And then why it's so important to practice and to rehearse. And while it may seem forced, it really often gives you that very important slight edge that is ever so important when the eyes of the world, candidly, could be on you and your county and or your state and everything that's going on. We know with social media and the 24-hour news cycle that stories don't occur in a vacuum. So it's really important. Early and engaging with the media. Again, while some of you may already have those relationships, it can go a long way. A lot of this, especially when dealing with a reporter, is about the human element and relationships and having that goodwill. So while it's great if you've already got those relationships, if you don't, it's important to maybe make those contacts now. And I think there's 2 ways to approach this. You can strike up. I think it's great. Reporters, more sources are better for them. So to have that cup of coffee to just kind of introduce yourself as we kind of get into the real thick of things with the election. But they're really busy and we are really close to the election day. So it may be that you need to tap into an opportunity to give them news or an announcement or a nugget that they can find timely and they can use in their reporting now. So they then have that kind of familiarity with you and know who to call. And you have a little bit of a rapport because in some of these really kind of sensitive, nuanced situations, having the relationship with the reporter and a good working relationship can make all the difference. When you do reach out to reporters, understanding how busy they are, if you're looking to kind of share with them an announcement, there's just a handful of things that are important frames that are going to better position you for them to either take your call, return your call, or ideally kind of write a story or do something with the information you're sharing. And I can go through these themes quickly, and some of them may be obvious, timeliness. It must be current, and current isn't last week. Current's like within the hour or tomorrow. I'm going to give you something in advance, something that they can use, and they can go to, all of these things, they can go to their editor with the straight face and say, this is something I'd like to see in print. Proximity, don't pitch a story about election software to a lifestyle reporter, understanding who is covering what, and it's something that's going to be relevant to their readers and their publication. We all know about trends and how kind of that can play into whether or not someone is likely to cover something, a change, any development, a conflict. They say if it, bleeds, it leads, and it's unfortunate, but that's, really what's going to drive the media today. Prominence, if this is something, an area where you can pull in another organization or another individual and kind of roll them into your announcement, that's something that's going to be key. And, education and awareness. Reporters are stretched thin. So even if, they've been covering election and elections in your area or civic things in your area for a few years, they are still really wanting education and they don't have time to do the research themselves. So I'm just going to harp on this because to the extent you can be a subject matter expert, for the press in your area, you're going to be very popular, and you're always going to get your call returned. And a surprise. I mean, unfortunately, a surprise, an event that is a departure from the norm may not be what we want when we wake up in our respective roles, but that is ultimately another piece that's going to be really kind of important to the media. So just starting that relationship and then keeping that relationship and finding ways to ping them. We've outlined a few kind of proactive media opportunities that fall into these categories, previewing a sample ballot, maybe giving somebody an exclusive. An exclusive is another way to almost surefire, as long as it's something that's semi-relevant and newsy, surefire get a story because it gives them a leg up on their competition. And we know how important that is in the media business currently. A change, something that their readers, are going to care about and think about, and is going to help them as they think towards going to the ballots and how things are going to be different potentially. And a demonstration, anything that is interactive, especially if you're maybe working with a TV reporter and you're able to bring them in and give them a tour. One thing we didn't mention on here, but we did this to the RNC with a lot of success, is maybe flagging for those reporters before. And you could do this in a group, and I know everyone's really busy, but I also think reaching out to the media and making them feel like they're getting personal one-on-one time with you, and maybe offering up, this is a preview, this is what election night is going to look like, this is what to watch for. If you hear this from us, if you hear X from us, that might mean Y. And you can do that off the record if you're not, necessarily comfortable with dealing with the press on a regular basis. And if you aren't, I'd suggest you get there. This is your role, but it's also something that you could, do on background. And I think that's something, as reporters think about their coverage over the next few weeks, they're going to find very valuable. And that's going to automatically kind of up your stock in terms of being a source. Building your playbook, making sure that you have kind of, and it sounds funny, but I'm a fan of having this in a kind of, it's a living document, meaning it's a document that can change, but having a physical copy of this, and some people like to, also store it online and have it be password protected. But this is really your kind of library of information. And whether it's past public information, fact sheets, press releases, when you're in a crisis year, it's a little bit the fog of war, and you don't want to be doing original research. So now is the time to pull together every fact and figure, even things that feel second nature, because you would likely be flustered and you may be pulling in outside consultants and people that this should be, ingrained in their brain, but they might forget or not have the information for whatever reason. So really compiling all of that and making sure you've got that handy. Second piece of this, and this is a little bit bigger than in the playbook, is clearly defined roles and responsibilities. So a crisis plan can be excellent, but it's only as great as the team that executes it. So I implore you to think about, when you build out your team, really thinking about okay, I've got a great team, but is this who I would want to use at the most sensitive period when I've got the most eyeballs on me? Think about people's strengths and weaknesses. This isn't the time to worry about kind of bruised feelings. A nervous introvert isn't going to make a great spokesperson, for example. On the other hand, somebody who's great with people, but isn't good with details, shouldn't be the one in charge of approving all of the documents that go out to the media. So really understanding who is going to be, best positioned for what role, even if it's not. Don't be afraid of pulling someone into a role that's not their normal role and isn't their day job, if you think that they are kind of uniquely qualified for it. I would advise with crises, it's better to start small and with a tight-knit group. It's not necessarily everyone that wants to be in the room and wants to have information, but those that really need to be there and are best suited for that role. It's a lot easier to expand your group than it is to cut people out for obvious reasons. And a really top-heavy or bottom-heavy organization is going to result in a slower crisis communication, and in crisis, every minute counts. And Matt will speak to that a little bit more. Up-to-date contact information. This isn't just for media stakeholders. Third parties are important, because really in a crisis, you often want to activate your allies and neutralize your foes. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But also internally, making sure when something happens, I mean, over the election, I know everybody's kind of going to be in one place, but making sure if need be, you can reach people all hours of the night, on the weekend, everyone's got an emergency contact. And also thinking about in terms of your team, keep in mind when a crisis occurs, you still have to do your day job. So you do really risk if there's a prolonged media event where it feels like you're, the campaign or whatnot, not only is continuing, but it's amplified. Think about having a kind of second tier or a backbench, if you will, of people that you can bring in so you've got fresh eyes. It's impossible for everyone to be at their A game, particularly since some of these events may happen after a prolonged election period when everybody's been working really hard in the lead up. Folks are going to get tired and you need those fresh eyes and you need that energy. So think about having a backup team, but building out this playbook and doing it now when you're not scrambling and when you are calm and kind of do have that perspective will pay beyond dividends. And I would say is probably the most important thing that you can take from this presentation. Oh, and lastly, this is a crisis. We're talking about crisis communications, but crisis management is another really kind of critical element to this. So crisis communications is a lot about kind of the message and the message development, and the crisis management is really like the logistics and the mechanics. And for that, you may need to involve and make sure you've got relationships with first responders, coordinated security plans, understanding where everyone should go, should there be a bomb threat. I mean, thinking through kind of all of these pieces and ensuring that, maybe somebody different on your team is thinking through the crisis management piece as you're working through the communications, and those kind of come together at that kind of pivotal time. Developing these messages, really important. We did a webinar on this before, but we want to speak to it again, because if you can't communicate clearly, you're immediately on your back foot. No two crises are alike. So while we encourage everybody to think through, like, what are the top 4 things that are likely to happen and how can we plan for those? We recognize that you're gonna have to maybe deviate from that. Having said that, it's a really good exercise, because again, like when time is of the essence and people are panicked and there's a lot of information flying around and people are getting calls and whatnot, is not the best time to really think through. And it's not when you're like your best writing, unless you're an adrenaline junkie like Matt and I and do this for a living. But thinking through some of those messages and crafting standby statements, whether it's around a recount or allegations of fraud or kind of missing ballots. You all are the pros, and these are probably the things that are keeping you up at night. So start to think, if we were really like in that position, what are the first few things we would say? Because time is of the essence. Matt will speak to that. What if you're not communicating kind of rapidly and you're leaving that silence, detractors and others are going to start to tell your story. So it's important that you've at least thought through the basics of those messages. And what I would say is that if you don't necessarily have the information right away, that's okay. It's an accuracy when it comes to message development. Accuracy is very important. It's okay to say, let me get back to you, or I'm working. It's actually better to say that than say nothing at all. But to be clear on that message. And there's a lot of moving parts, especially if this involves a legal case or something, election integrity. There's a lot of facts and a lot of different elements that can go into your message and into your communications, but no more than 5. There's a few reasons for this. Like, scientifically, like if they're hearing something in television or radio, they're not going to absorb more than 5 supporting points. Also, if you're dealing with a reporter and you're putting out a statement or something on social media, they can pull whatever they want into the story and just use and cut up a part of it. So the more facts you have, the more likely it is that they're going to pull out probably not what you would have chosen if you knew you were only going to be able to say 2 things in your response to the media. So to the extent that you can, keep it brief and cover maybe the 3 most important points, and 4 if you need to, or your general counsel insists on it, But absolutely kind of keeping that tight. Another piece here that I'll mention is probably one of the most important things is we understand it's a very kind of, like every election, it's a very closely divided country and emotions run high and hot, but to lead with facts and to ensure that all of your communications are fact-based, because inevitably there will be detractors that would like to accuse you of bias on one side or the other, and don't give them any fuel or any reason to believe that you have any bias other than making sure the election is safe and secure and accurate. So if an accusation is ridiculous or expletively stupid or something, let the reader or the viewer kind of draw that. Don't put that into your messaging. Like it instantly cuts at your credibility. It's unprofessional, and it's unnecessary. And that absolutely is what the media will use rather than kind of the facts that support your argument. So all things to keep in mind when developing those messages. Practicing your plan, the playbook is only good as the information that's in it, and the information, as we know, can change on a daily basis by news cycle. So making sure that if this is something you developed a year ago and you think, oh, I'm set, no, take that thing out, dust it off. Chances are, like, a lot of the dynamics, certainly a lot of the players may have changed. Reporters now move around and switch beats on a more frequent than ever before basis. So making sure that you've got all of that contact information. The publication hasn't shut down because we're seeing the media kind of consolidate, and you've got the latest individuals, the latest messages. The messages are still relevant and the facts are still relevant, and your playbook is still up to date with the latest information, because we know kind of a lot of these things continue to evolve and expand. And then you've trained your spokespeople, because again, it's one thing to, draft a statement, say, I feel comfortable with that. Oh, I'd love to talk to the media. I always wanted to do that when but this is not the time for a crisis is not the time for on-the-job training. So to the extent you can really practice this plan and make sure that at a minimum, all of your information is accurate and correct, you're in a much better position than you are if you are using something that's aired and then you find that people are finger pointing. And keep it to a minimum. Ensure that the real focus is going to be on how do we take these tools we've put together and navigate them for the situation at hand, and how it continues to evolve. So I know that developing a plan and practicing a plan in 6 weeks may feel like an impossible feat, but I also think if you're, it's fresh if you're closer to the election. So to the extent you can, you've got that working for you, that's a good thing. And I'm going to let Matt Hartwig, who I spoke a little bit about my background in presidential campaigns. Matt Hartwig was at the DNC, has worked on the Hill, worked at BP, worked in the private sector. So he's got knows a thing or two about crisis, and he's going to talk about kind of the throngs of this responding in real time.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. As she said, when that crisis hits, time is rarely on your side, right? And we'll go through a bit of sort of the life cycle or the life stages of a crisis as it evolves from the moment that it breaks, to the days, and let's hope not, but possibly the weeks that follow. So we'll talk about kind of the principle or the idea of a golden hour. We'll talk about 3 A's, ways to help you organize your response, especially once you've gathered more information, and then finally coming back to the relationships that Tracy had spoken about. If you want to go to the golden hour, this is that idea that from the moment the news breaks, you have a finite period of time in which to say something, right? Media, they abhor a vacuum. If you don't say it, as Tracy said, somebody is going to try to say it for you. That's where the preparation and the playbook and those pre-approved messages come in. You can see the example there. It's okay to say, I'm not aware of that issue. I don't have all the facts, but let me look into it and get back to you. And then pivot, as you recall from that first training, some of you may have seen, use some of those interview techniques to bridge back to a message you want to talk about, whether it's a successful early voting program or security measures you have put in place, whatever it happens to be. it gives you something to say in the moment while you and your team can go and learn more about what the issue may be. This is also, this period of time, perhaps is also when those relationships, particularly with the media, really start to pay off. They may give you the benefit of the doubt, right? If you're in a smaller jurisdiction, maybe there is only a single media outlet that is going to be covering this. You might have more time, than somebody in a larger metropolitan area, like a Arizona or a Las Vegas or something like that. Those this is when those relationships can really pay off. And the other thing, in this moment when you do respond, don't just respond to whomever is asking. Think about all the channels available to you, where all of your stakeholders might be. Not everyone lives on social media, not everyone watches the nightly news. Make sure that you're getting your information out to them in all of the relevant channels you have access to make sure that they feel informed and understand your point of view, and if there's anything that they need to do, or just the broader context is super important. So now you've had some time, you've responded in that golden hour, whatever that window of time is, depending upon the situation. Now you understand a little bit more about the story, the issue, the crisis. What's at the heart of it? Who's behind it? Who's alleging it, right? So here, once you've done that, now's your chance to calmly address it, right? You've kind of maybe done a little bit of this work in the playbook, or maybe it's something new, but you've got some messages that you can work with. So the first thing we had, the first A, is sort of acknowledge what's going on, right? You may think it's wild and crazy or completely fabricated, right? But there's enough there, or this reporter's hearing enough about it that they think it's newsworthy enough to ask. So don't be dismissive or brash. Just acknowledge that, hey, I understand that you have questions about whatever that issue happens to be. Let me tell you more. And then address the issue at hand, right? Whatever it is, be straight up. You probably have, you can probably guess the issue. So you're probably able to fill in and address the issue with the message you want to talk about. Voter security, allegations of fraud, safety at the polling place, whatever it may be. Once you've addressed it, that third step is then tell people what you're doing about it. Perhaps you've already put the measures in place, so you're able to say, hey, we've already taken steps to ensure that this doesn't happen, and we're confident that it isn't. Or you can say, we looked into it and we've taken these actions to address the issues that you've raised. So that the voters are safe, or the vote is secure. But these are the 3 A's that you can come back to once you know a little bit more, feel confident that you understand the issue, and then have had a moment to compile your answers and take a breath. The last piece is lean into your relationships. We talked about it, maybe this being most important or most valuable when you're in that golden hour right after the crisis happens, or that media inquiry comes in. A good relationship, perhaps you're able to, maybe you're able to kill the story. Maybe the reporter says, you know what, I hear you, there really isn't anything there. It's a great chance to remind them of what you've previously shared with them, right? If you've done some of that work and brought them in to look at the voting machines, or where you tabulate the votes, or you just did the briefing and said, hey, this is what to expect on election night. As Tracy said, when we say this is what we're talking about. Remind them that you've told them that. It may be that they've forgotten, or they got it confused over time. It's just a simple act to reestablish that relationship. Those community groups and leaders that you've identified and worked with, leverage them. Share your statement with them so they know what you're saying. Make sure that they have any key messages or facts or talking points that you want them to have. They can become sort of ambassadors, third-party validators for you in the community. And can go a long way to perhaps tamping down a crisis and confining it to maybe just that one news cycle. And finally, you're all on this call for a reason. I would encourage you to utilize this network, right? My guess is, as Tommy's going to share, they've either been through it already or going through it now, and probably have resources, tactics, tips, something that you can borrow from that can help you address whatever the crisis is that you're facing. So now you've gotten through that golden hour, you understand what's happening, you've sort of made your first statements, or you've engaged in a more fulsome way because you understand what's going on. Now comes hopefully a very short monitor the conversation and adapt period in which what you said answered the questions and things calmed down. As we've seen in previous elections, sometimes it drags on a little bit longer. So you need to monitor the conversation. Who is saying what, and on which channels are they saying it, right? If the conversation is happening entirely on social media, and you're just posting things to your website in the hopes that people see them, it's probably not making the connection that you need to make. And you need to compare what you're saying to the conversation that is happening, right? If people are talking about, we think we saw them throwing votes away in the dumpster, and you're talking about the election system that you use, those are not the same conversations, right? And so you will be ships passing in the night as you try to bat down, some of the misinformation and disinformation that's out there. And as you've gathered this and you monitor who's saying what and where, and you're comparing what you're saying to the conversations they're saying, and you're doing this on at least a daily basis, if not more frequently, adjust, tweak your message, maybe adjust your mix of tactics and channels you use, and go heavier into social media and maybe less into relying on the print newspaper or the radio, for example. But it's really important that you don't say what you have to say and then walk away assuming that the crisis is over and the issue is done, because unfortunately it's probably still lingering somewhere and you don't want it to flare back up on you.
Yeah, I know we went through a lot of information in 33 minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and just kind of summarize it. If you work in election, unfortunately, if you work in the election space in 2024, controversy and crisis will find you. It's like death and taxes. There's no kind of getting out of here alive, they say. So make sure that you're prepared and you have done your homework and your lead time. Again, 6 weeks may seem, I know it's going to go by in a flash, but there's absolutely, you can find that time to sit with your team and to carve out and get your playbook ready and get your team ready. Because if you don't, you will regret it, and it will show. It's like preparation, like anything else. The importance of being responsive and understanding the need to feed that beast, being the media, and do so kind of at an opportune time as soon as you can. And even if you don't have all of the facts, because otherwise, as Matt said, your detractors or the media will fill in those facts for you. And it's likely not going to be the favorable narrative or the accurate narrative that you would hope for. And when you do communicate with the media, and ensuring that your messaging kind of follows the 3 A's, acknowledging the circumstances, whether or not they're accurate or not, making sure that the reporter or the viewer or the reader or the adversary feels heard in your communications. Matter of factly, not with emotion, which I realize is very difficult to do, addressing the issue at hand, and then articulating the actions that you're taking and showing that you're not just talking the talk, but you are also walking the walk and addressing, mitigating, and navigating the situation. Leaning into these relationships, understanding that this is a time to really kind of activate your allies and potentially neutralizing your foes. Third parties not only can add, a great deal of credibility by underscoring your reputation and your commitment, but also they can serve as detractors if they're and not be helpful on the flip side. And sometimes it's as much as giving somebody a heads up early that something is happening, even if they're not going to be aligned with you, can go a long way in leaning into those relationships. And lastly, as Matt spoke to, it'd be great if you give your quote, the story runs, and move on, issue over, but that's often not the case. So really monitoring the crisis as it continues to play out and adapting your response to ensure that you are kind of doing so in kind and, continuing to have everything under control and refining the message when need be. So with that, I had the good fortune, even though it was a crisis, but of working with Tommy Gong, who is the Deputy County Clerk-Recorder of Contra Costa County in California, which ironically is where I was born, and I got to connect with him out here in DC and work with him on an issue around a data breach with election workers. And it was, he's going to speak a little bit more in terms of how we navigated that and what lessons we can take from that real life experience to assist us in our scenarios. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tommy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. Welcome to everyone who's here today. I know we're all very busy here with the election. In fact, my t-shirt is also just saying elections everywhere all at once, because that's the life that we're living here right now. I would say that, you know, the situation we experienced was about 2 years ago, almost exactly, in that there was an arrest of the president of a poll worker management system company, and we were kind of caught in the crossfire with this. I think because our election is so under a microscope right now, that what may happen in another jurisdiction, it could be across the nation, is going to could potentially have an effect on your jurisdiction. So disinformation could cause some collateral damage to us as an election official on the other side of the nation, and that we need, and that I recognize that we're not all communication professionals, and we need to find a way to be able to combat this. And the training that Tracy is providing is very helpful here. So yes, this president of this company, of this poll worker training company, was indicted and arrested for potentially a breach of poll worker data in their jurisdiction. As a result, we could kind of see, we were monitoring the news, you know, especially on election line, seeing the news as happening across the country. It's starting to grow a little bit in the media, not like an explosion of data, but obviously we could see that it was being addressed. And in fact, there were other jurisdictions who were canceling their contracts with the company because of the accusation, unproven. We had actually communicated with the company to be assured of where our poll worker data is being stored. In that case, it was Lansing, Michigan, and not in China as it was accused. And so, but at the same time, we weren't sure when it was going to be appropriate for us to address it with the public. It had not reached the West Coast per se. They were other news items were listing the particular jurisdictions that were using the same system, and we weren't being listed. So we were like, okay, do we need to actually respond to this or not? And it was our communications with Tracy that Tracy had said, look, you guys had built up so much goodwill with the media, with the reporters, and with the public, that if we don't get out in front of the game here to you know, to report this out, and that rest assured that there are no issues and that we're going to continue using the system, that this is something that, you know, we're going to lose that credibility and the goodwill that we had built. And so that was when we decided, with Tracy's recommendation, that why don't we reach out? It's not like a press release or that we're going to do a press conference, but instead, why don't we reach out to a few of the reporters that we know that we think have done a good job representing us in our work, and let's let them know about what's happening here. I should also share, serendipitously, and maybe not so much in a good way, but we were also receiving emails to our poll worker training folks, the folks who manage the poll workers, and they were asking, hey, we read this news article about, you know, the system that we're using, and they were wondering if we were going to continue to use it. And we had answered that we were planning to continue to use it, that we saw, you know, no concerns of security in this case. Turns out that communication showed up on Truth Social, and so we had a bit of an email campaign come to us that way, and some of the messaging was rather intimidating and even somewhat threatening, that we felt we needed to do something about this. And so We reached out to the media. It happened to be the same time we were doing our logic and accuracy test. So oftentimes we'll invite the media to come and to observe that process and to, put it out to the public about what we do with our voting equipment. So with those few reporters that we reported to, that I planted this story with, hey, this is also happening. And so why don't you come here for the logic and accuracy test? But then we're also, have this particular news story that we want to address with you. And so it so happened that, we had some of the email communications that was presented to us, and we really kind of was able to turn the tables on that news story to say, look at the type of accusations that are being made, unfounded, the intimidating language that's coming to our office, and that this is really unacceptable behavior of the public in terms of trying to threaten us to doing our jobs. And so it really kind of worked out for us in this way. When I think back on it, and especially with the advice that Matt and Tracy gave, we had already engaged with the media before. It was during the primary that I was really starting to engage with the media before. We gave them tours of the office. On election night, they were in our office covering the tabulation process and our updates of our reports. So we had developed some pretty good relations with them already. When I think back on our playbook, in 2020, our elections division actually did consult with some media training, and so there was some remnants of that in 2022. Just so happened, though, where we're at right now in 2024, that there is no one from 2020 that are in place in 2024. So we have a lot of new people in our office right now, and so we're also recognizing that the roles are changing, and as mentioned earlier, the reporters are changing too, that you need to also be up on those. As we were preparing our talking points and what we were going to communicate to the media, I reflected on the nature of the accusation and who the company is, who the president is, in that he's Chinese, and that there were accusations that this data was being stored in China and that there were connections to the Chinese Communist Party, for example. So recognizing that I am also Chinese and had also been accused of being a secret member of the Chinese Communist Party before, that I decided that it would be best for me not to be the spokesperson or the messenger for the department, that take me out of the element. We have other competent people who can represent the department. We prepared them with the talking points of what to be said. And so we just wanted to take that question out of the element. And so all in all, I consider it to be a pretty successful process that we went through. It did take more than a few days, I would say. It wasn't something that we decided on in minutes or hours. And then again, that was what the nature of that. We were struggling with this, and that's why we did decide to reach out to Tracy of her opinion about what we should do. I would say all in all, it was in the matter of about 5 days that we were seeing the news starting to grab onto this headline of what was happening with the DA's office pressing charges, and seeing what was happening in other states with jurisdictions pulling out of their contracts with the vendor, and then the emails we received. So these were all kind of telltale points leading us to making the decision that we did. So I'd like to think that we were adaptable. We were, staying on top of what was happening and honing in on what our message was going to be when we communicated with the media. So I was kind of, serendipitous, like I say, in terms of how everything came together. But I will say that having Tracy's help, having someone who is outside the office and separate from the operations, who can really provide guidance to us when it comes to these, very public operations that we're involved in now, in the spotlight, can be very, very helpful. So I will share at the very end that since then we have developed a crisis communications plan. I see that it aligns very closely to our continuity of operations plan because it has to do with timing, how quickly we have to respond, who has what role, who are we going to contact. And so it really works in hand with all of our other emergency plans that we have in place. So I do wholly support for counties and jurisdictions to consider doing that. And it's not too late. Even though it's 47 days before the election, there's still plenty of time to establish that relationship with the media. It will only get worse potentially between now and as we get closer to election day or even after election day. So if we can provide those, reach out to the media and give them a tour of the office or to explain to them about what we do in terms of testing our voting equipment to provide more assurance and trust to the public, that I think that you'll lay out a lot of good groundwork for the media when you need them in situations like this.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tommy. Thank you, Matt and Tracy. My name's Walker Irving and I work with EOLDN. I will moderate the Q&A here. So if people have questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next couple of minutes here. So our first question is, how would you handle media that show up to your office unannounced?
I'll go ahead and take this one. Although crawling under your desk may seem like the most desirable option, that's not recommended. I think a lot of this goes back to the planning that we discussed and the ensuring that you have your toolbox, locked and loaded. Ideally, nobody wants to be giving, their first interaction with the press to be an in-person press conference. Having said that, if you really if you have your messages and you've identified not only the messaging, but the mechanics of it, and you have it, and I would recommend that you all identify somewhere that if press do show up, there's almost like, I hate to say a holding pen, but there's an area where you would feel comfortable with all of them gathering. And there is a question, or even better, you want to give a prepared statement. You can, depending on the situation, you can take questions, you can not take questions. That would be sort of my recommendation. If it's one reporter, you can always tell them you're going to talk to them on the phone later. If you have a handful of reporters, I would, ideally have them in one place. It's probably not, if a handful of reporters show up, it's probably not going to be a total shock, right? Because obviously something is unfolding in real time that they need answers to, and they believe it warrants that tactic. But that would be kind of my take. I don't know, Matt, if you have another read on that. Again, it's not briefing reporters in kind of real time is probably never anyone's sort of favorite activity, unless, they would love to be a White House press secretary, but it can, you've got everybody there giving your prepared statement and making sure that the press understands that you are engaged and you are communicative is not a bad thing either.
Okay, great. Okay, the next question is, what if you don't have the information that the media is asking for?
This is really common, and I don't think it's anything that you need to feel, ideally you will have kind of most of the basic facts and figures laid out in your playbook, and a lot of the things that you can reference or press statements that you've said before. But that's probably, you may not have it on your fingertips. You may need to call, you may need to get approval. If this is something that is a legal issue, you may need to run it by your general counsel. It's likely you want to run it by some other person. So I think it's absolutely fine to say, let me look into that and get back to you. It's far better than ghosting the media or making it look like you are being non-responsive, to which people will tend to sort of assume, malpractice, or assume blame, or assume you're hiding something and being less than transparent. So always better to say, let me get that information and get back to you. And it may not be today that I can get back to you, but I want you to know we recognize that you have questions about this and we're finding out more info.
Okay, great. Okay, next question. How would you respond to wild or blatantly false allegations and questions?
I would go back to leading with the facts. I mean, there have been kind of scenarios in my career or in something where I was in a, political spokesperson role and said, I'm not gonna, or often people say, I'm not gonna acknowledge that with a response because it's so, egregious. I think in the roles that most of you all be in, it's, very important to keep emotions or hyperbole or trying to be clever and embarrass the person that's accusing you of X, Y, and Z. And really just stick to the facts, because again, that alleviates anyone having further ammunition to accuse you of having bias or having an agenda. You can't have bias or an agenda if you are, clearly and articulating the facts as they unfold. I don't know if Tommy or Matt have anything color to add, and you guys jump in here.
Yeah, I will just say that, I mean, sometimes what I realize is how, especially on TV, on TV news, how they edit, what you say. And so they're looking for that soundbite that they're going to capture from you to show at the 5 o'clock news, right? So you want to be prepared with those sound bites that you're going to say. And those are the ones that you're going to emphasize, and not the ones to deny the false accusations of whatsoever, but rather this is what the public should know. And then, have your talking points prepared, and that, hopefully those are the things that make the cut, right?
Yeah, you can never be misquoted with anything you didn't say, right? So that's why sometimes, people like to be conversational, especially if you have goodwill and rapport with the reporter. But in the interest of accuracy and having the ultimate favorable result, it's better to keep it succinct and know exactly what you're going to say and say nothing kind of more than that.
Right. Okay, we have one more question unless people add some more to the Q&A box, but do you have any tips for responding to allegations on social media, but that are not in the mainstream media? Like they mean like news or, the news media like print or TV.
Yeah, I can jump in and take that one. And I wish I could say that social media is great and everything there is true and what a great venue to engage. Unfortunately, I think we all know that isn't true, but it doesn't mean it's not important to know what's going on, right? So I think having, it's a bit of that monitor, and adapt piece of it, but it may come up that this is happening ahead of the election, right? You may actually get tipped off by monitoring the conversation to an issue that's percolating that may turn into a crisis. And so you can act accordingly, right? If there's a conversation that's happening, and there seems to be, you do the due diligence, there seems to be a little bit of credibility to it. Perhaps there's something you can do from that proactive list of things that Tracy shared at the beginning, or you can lean into the relationships that you have, or those frank and honest conversations, and say, maybe it's a reporter and say, hey, we've seen this, I'm sure you have too, want you to know there's nothing to it. Remember, this is what we talked about the last time we got together, and this is how we're prepared to address it come election day. I wish I could say you could ignore that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, I don't think that you can. So your best bet is to have somebody who can monitor it, who can raise up those issues that seem to have, either the most intensity, or maybe have a nugget of truth in them, so that you can address them on your own terms rather than end up getting pulled into a tit for tat, on Twitter or somewhere else.
Okay, great. All right, well, that is it for our questions. So I will hand it over to Angie.
Thank you, Walker. And I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. As Tommy said, and Tracy and Matt also said, very busy election season that is gearing up now, but you spent some time with us today, and we really appreciate that. We want to thank Tracy and Matt for their wonderful guidance. We want to thank Tommy for sharing his experience working with CGCN to navigate this crisis. And We would like you to be, to keep an eye on your email in the coming days. We will follow up with the recording of this presentation, as well as additional resources that can give additional guidance on how to navigate crises such as the ones we talked about today in the last 60 minutes. I would like to wish all of you election officials out there the best of luck this fall and beyond. Please don't forget, if you want to learn more about the Election Official Legal Defense Network and our free services, including legal help for individual election officials and communications help for eligible election offices at no cost, please visit EOLDN.org, the acronym for Election Official Legal Defense Network.org. We are here to support you. Thank you for your time today. Goodbye.